2009 big hats and to the
Alright, hello everyone. Hello. Hello and welcome to the 5:30 block of QueerTalk presentations. My name is Lee from the LGBT Resource Center and I'll be the facilitator. Before I introduce you to the presenters, I want to remind you of the guidelines for conduct and conversation we set for QueerTalk that's on your brochures, that presenters are not required to answer any questions they don't want to. Also, if you need to leave at any time, the auditorium near the entrance to the Honors College where we just were is open for reflection and rest. This session will be live streamed. Now, let me introduce you to Max Klaw and Elijah Zagorski. Max uses he/him pronouns, and Elijah uses they/them pronouns, and they're giving trans folks in the sex industry. Trigger warnings include transphobia and cissexism, racism, classism, mentions of violence, and sexual themes and imagery. Printouts of their presentations and subtitles for a video are available for anyone who needs them at the back of the room. All right, thank you.
Hello, y'all. I'm Elijah Zagorski, they/them pronouns. Some background about who I am. I'm a fourth year here. I'll be graduating in April. I'm studying psychology and political science, and I also have 2 minors in queer studies and human sexuality.
My name's Max Klaw. I use he/him pronouns. I am a social work major here, and I'm a queer studies minor. And then the title of our presentation is called Trans Folk in the Sex Industry.
Yes. So kind of a bit of background about where this presentation came from. We first did this presentation in our communications course called Communicating with the LGBT Community. The title's kind of something.
Content warnings, again. Includes mentioning of the porn industry, sex fetishization and dehumanization, prostitution, camming, sex toys, mention of anti-trans violence, language, sexual themes, discussion of cissexism, and images of sex toys are used in our presentation.
Yes, there's not any nudity displayed, just as a note. However, sex toys that do look like genitalia. All right. So just as a little icebreaker, a little bit of discussion in this room. So what are some stereotypes or themes or something that you are aware of how trans people are represented in pornography? Does anybody have anything that they're aware of? There's a hand.
Like the she-male?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is definitely a major one. That's usually some form of a category on a lot of porn sites where they're this is a whole category where you can look at this person who looks a certain way. Is anybody aware of porn sites that may include or not include trans men or trans masculine people? Right. What about gender non-conforming people?
They don't exist.
They just said they don't exist.
Usually you have to pay for them.
You usually have to pay for that. Yeah. So, moving forward in our presentation, this is going to work great. So the first kind of subtopic I'm going to discuss is the idea of fetishization. So basically, what is fetishization to begin with, and why is it wrong, or why some people might like it, depending on perspective. Great. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over here. Cool. So let's just get some working definitions of what words we're using and what are they supposed to mean in the context of this presentation. So who are we talking about right now when we say trans people, to clarify? We're definitely talking about trans men, definitely talking about trans women. We're also definitely talking about non-binary people as well, and potentially gender non-conforming folks as well, depending. And then going a bit more forward, are we talking about drag queens and drag kings? Possibly. It depends on how people want to use that working word of trans, or how you want to use that working idea of cissexism, where there's a priority and privilege placed on gender conformity and being cisgender. And then what is fetishization? It's kind of basically an attraction based on assumption. It tends to dehumanize folks and like give them a idea of who they are without even acknowledging who they actually are, usually based on their identity. And often offensive language is frequently used. So assumptions lead to stereotypes. They lead to people not fully recognizing the actual person that we're like talking about. So if we're talking about like a transmasculine person, some things that may be associated with them would be like this special treat depending on who the person is. Also, these things tend to lead to prejudice and discrimination as well. It leads to people not actually thinking about a person they're interacting with in everyday life. This can be an issue in the areas of like discrimination along work, within educational spaces, at the medical, doctors, clinics. We already kind of touched on some of this. If you would like to press on. Okay, so even the phrase itself, some people identify themselves as being trans-attracted, transsexual, or also trans-amorous. These words are also something that are all going to be falling under a category that usually trans communities, in my experience, would consider chasers. So people who explicitly might go out seeking a trans person specifically to be like, wow, I want to have sex with a trans person. But they may not actually want to like engage with them romantically or even get to know them as a person. So as this quote outlines, even the phrase itself, trans-attracted, demonstrates how this fetish is inherently trans-misogynistic. If those who identify with this label saw trans women as real women, they wouldn't need a word to differentiate us from other women in order to explain their attraction to us. So this was said, I believe, by Chelsea Poe. Chelsea Poe, who is somebody who's been working in the porn industry for a number of years.
All right, so moving forward, I'm going to talk about sex work and like the different types of sex work people might participate in. So specifically right now, I'm going to be talking about camming, prostitution, and the violence issues that can come with both of those things, as well as the violence and also generally working in the porn industry. Camming is defined as usually as refers to the act of providing sexual content or entertainment over the internet. This is a picture of a trans woman who camps in Colombia. Her name is Sarah. Sarah said camming was able to provide her with the money to transition. So she even said in this article that I read that she was interviewed in, some camming companies actually pay for people to transition, and like to some people, medically transitioning is really, really important to them, but not to all trans people. And a lot of trans people turn to doing these kinds of things to pay for transition because health insurance doesn't pay for medical transition, or like it's really hard for trans people to find jobs in the world outside of these industries. And then the quote, and then Violet Queen, who is another person that was interviewed in this article, says camming's a lot better because it's a lot better than being on the street and running the risk of danger. It's better to work in webcams. It gives you more money, and it's much safer. And Violet Queen in this article goes on to even say when you're like camming on these websites, you can say no to people. But if you're prostituting yourself on the streets, you can't say no, and there's more likeliness for violent actions. So this is a statistic from a study done in 2015 from the National Center of Transgender Equality. It's in the survey of 3,000, I think it was 27,715 trans people reported. 12% of them, the respondents reported prostituting themselves. The NCTE defines prostitution as sex work in exchange for income. So 12% of 12,715 is 3,325.8 of the participants responded that they prostitute themselves. Some more statistics on transgender prostitution is I think this is the next slide, yeah. Yes. So this is a little graph that also represents what I'm about to say. Trans feminine respondents were nearly twice as likely to participate in the sex trade compared to trans masculine respondents. However, trans masculine respondents comprise 26.4% of all sex trade participants. While most discussions of sex work and trans people focus on transgender women, the finding shows that many trans masculine people are engaged in the sex trade. So kind of like Eli was saying earlier with fetishization, or we've kind of gone over the fact that like trans masculine folk aren't as represented in the industry. Next slide. And then, so I'm going to go now into trans people working in the porn industry. Many porn companies won't even sign transgender people to participate. Porn companies also tend to use derogatory term to categorize trans people, like we've heard it earlier, she-male, words like tranny, chick with a dick. Sometimes they refer to trans masculine men as bonus hole boys. Some stars don't mind these terms. Like many things within the queer community, it's a personal preference. I couldn't find much about trans masculine or non-binary people in the professional porn industry, aside from a few people, one of which we'll be discussing later on in this presentation. And then next slide. And then this is Groovy. It's one of them. I think this one was like a trans specific, more so specifically trans women porn company, and it was like one of the first ones. So this is a quote from Chelsea Poe. What ends up happening is a lot of trans women in porn have to go off hormones to perform. Obviously doing that is super harmful to your body. So like sometimes in order for trans people to perform in this industry, so this Chelsea was specifically referencing how like one time she was literally told, because like when you go on hormones, when you specifically go on estrogen and you have a penis, you're no longer able to like get hard or stay hard as long. So in order for them to perform, they're going on and off hormones. There was even reports, another woman that I found who was interviewed in this article said that she was told to take a pill before in a scene, and they didn't even tell her what it was. They just told her to take it so she could like do her job. And like there was other reports of like trans women being told to take Viagra before they did these scenes. All right, now I'm going to talk about empowerment. So I made a survey and sent it out to various different porn blogs on the social media website Tumblr, because that's where you could find a lot more representation of the trans community. This is a bar graph that I took from my Google questionnaire, and I kind of just put it up here to represent like all the different type of gender identities that kind of took this survey. And one of the questions I asked them was, why do you do it? And one of the people said, a mix of reasons. There's a market for trans porn. Jobs in general aren't always trans friendly. I also am finally feeling comfortable in my body and rather enjoy showing it off. It's a very euphoric feeling to be desired like that. Some people said mostly for body empowerment. We live in a world that can be cruel to people for how their bodies look. As a trans woman, I am under even more intense scrutiny and pressure to pass, even though I do not live up to the ideal of the Western American beauty is in general. I still do it because it's a way of showing off how I can be confident about who I am, despite the fact. So a lot of these people responded in very similar ways, that they did it to feel good about themselves because for the first time in their lives, since like coming out or like being able to transition, they feel comfortable with their own bodies. And it's kind of like a sense of reclaiming themselves. And I think that's really important. And then one person said to validate trans bodies as attractive. A lot of people don't see trans bodies as attractive. Like I remember my freshman year of college, I was in an anthropology class and we were playing like the side of the room game. Like if you feel this way about this thing, go to this side. If you feel that way, go to this side. My teacher asked who in this room would date a trans person, and only me and one other person went to the side of the room that said yes. And it's hurtful knowing that people don't want you just because of something you can't control. And it's to show that we're not inherently unattractive or non-sexual beings.
Alright, so time to chat a little bit about sex toys and the sex toy market. Okay, so some reasons why a trans person may potentially use a sex toy they identify with, or potentially like for the sex that they may identify more with rather than their assigned sex. So that is one reason. When we're talking about the creation of the market and the selling and the production of sex toys, this could be definitely done for a number of reasons, using money as point one, because they do cost money, unfortunately, capitalism. But then also going into the normalization of gender as well, gender exploration, having a different gender identity, or interacting with a sexual partner or partners in a way that is more desired and affirming for the individual, as well as the exploration of sexuality as a whole. As we had previously mentioned, trans folks tend to get desexualized. Their sexuality is looked at as invalid or not relevant to who they are as a person. However, trans folks also say that it does matter and that it's a part of them just as much as anybody else. And sex toys may be a way to help cope with finding that gender euphoria in a sexual manner. So some things that are available on the market include, in the top left section, that's called the Bro Sleeve 2.0, which is marketed towards either folks who have a penis of like 2 inches or smaller, or for transmasculine folks, whether they have gone on testosterone and have like an enlarged clitoris. It's a way to simulate like the hand job, quote unquote, type of stimulation. In the middle is the vibrator, which is frequently marketed towards like cisgender women as a way to achieve a clitoral orgasm. However, through the very relatively popular Tumblr zine called Fucking Trans Women, it is also recommended to transgender women and trans feminine folks as another way to achieve pleasure in a different way, as it is coded more towards feminine people and marketed towards that community. They may feel a stronger connection to it. Going over to the bottom middle left, that is something that is a newer toy that is called the Transformer, and it is created by Picobong, I believe is the company's name. It's essentially a sex toy that is intentionally created in a gender-neutral way, that is intentionally for people of all different bodies and all different gender identities and expressions. But right now, it's kind of in that image. It kind of has like a Spider-Man look to it. but that is a flexible spine that it has that can be adjusted to meet the needs of one person, two people, more than two people who may be wanting to use it together. And it can also be made to fit different like genital parts, or potentially used for penetration. It does vibrate. Another one, very similar to the Bro Sleeve 2.0 is the Buck Off, created by Buck Angel along with his T-Lube, which is specifically created for transmasculine people who go on testosterone and may be experiencing vaginal dryness, which may affect not only like everyday life and comfort, but also during potentially intercourse. Here are some other items as well. Here's an image on the right side of that zine titled Fucking Trans Women, which was written by trans women for trans women and their loving partners for different like methods and ways that may be more gender affirming or may just in general be more pleasurable. In that zine, they actually go through explaining how to use this one technique that is called muffing, which is essentially how you would finger a penis, which is not frequently talked about. A lot of people don't necessarily know about that. Along the top is a website that has a lot of efforts put forth into being more inclusive towards the trans community, Early to Bed. If you notice, their category for penis toys, that is referring to toys that may be used for somebody who has a penis, rather than how frequently other companies might market them as like men's toys, women's toys. They don't do that. Similarly with vibrators and dildos, they also don't have it categorized in that gendered way, so that people are able to more easily find what they're looking for, but also be able to find guides and recommendations where they also have, they essentially pay folks who are like trans, such as, for example, Chase Ross. He's a popular YouTuber. He reviews a lot of sex toys of theirs on the YouTube. And there's also other folks as well that they include in their own like blog section of this website. A couple other sex toys being the Real Dough or the Feel Dough, depending on which section, which essentially is a strapless strap-on for you to use. Some people say that it gives a more realistic feeling of like having a penis while penetrating than a strap-on may offer, and that's why they like it. And in the middle, there's, it looks like a kind of hollowed out penis that is, it's called the BJ penis. So essentially it would be used for somebody who wanted to simulate the feelings of receiving a blowjob rather than a different experience like directly. So it has that sucking feeling rather than just general stimulation. Yes, so generally some pros and cons of this. Definitely obvious pros being great exploration of sexuality as well as gender as like a layered and potentially intersectional experience. However, some cons are definitely the accessibility to these items, not only financially but also potentially being able to either go into stores safely that are selling them. A lot of stores don't sell them to begin with, and being able to purchase these items online isn't always a thing that everybody can do.
Alright, so celebrities. Well, actually, we're only really talking about one celebrity. This is a transmasculine man. His name is Buck Angel. He's one of the most well-known, I feel, trans masculine people in the pornography industry. Oh, I think the videos are in the notes.
Okay, please hold because we are going to pull up a couple of videos. Before going into that, I just want to note a couple of, Buck Angel is a man who has a lot of critiques from within the trans community and other communities as well, because of his almost aggressive reclamation of the word being the man with the pussy. That is how he kind of got into the the porn industry and kind of made way for different trans people to come into the porn industry by being like, this is who I am, and people were receptive to that.
Industry.
Hang on.
However, he is not the most inclusive person. He's like relatively known for being racist, like blatantly, and then not being very apologetic about it. And also he's pretty binary in general. However, like that's usually not his intention, but it's still a thing. Another thing about him that is a common critique, what is it? I will continue in
Is
one
it the
moment.
fact that he uses the word transsexual, or do you bring that one over?
That's that one.
He also uses the word transsexual to describe himself, which is a more outdated term, but he also is an older trans person. He's been transitioning for 23 years. So since before, so like, that was like early 90s, late 90s, somewhere in there. Is that, am I on the play button?
No, lower. Can we make it louder?
Industry because there was no representation of a man like myself who used to be a woman and became a man. And I felt like very strongly about myself and my sexuality and my body and body positivity. And I didn't see that in the adult industry, specifically with trans women. So I felt like there was something missing there. So I got involved in that and started to work in that field and wanted to bring a lot of positive body and sexuality into that field. So that's the industry that I work in. Growing up, I always felt like a guy. I mean, I think a lot of trans people, I consider myself more of a transsexual, and I live my life as a man. Now the word is more transgender or trans, but I really feel like more of a transsexual person, and so I always...
Okay, and then we're going to also show something else with him in it. If I can find how to... It's fine.
Yeah, so to further explain kind of what transsexual versus transgender, the general meaning behind those words, transsexual tends to refer to folks who want to seek a medical affirmation, so people who might want to go on hormones or potentially like hormone blockers, or people who want to seek like surgery of some kind, depending on who they are, what their needs are. And whereas transgender more refers to that gender identity being different than their assigned sex and their like assigned role. And also folks who that tends to be more an inclusive term who may include like drag queens and kings under it, or people who generally don't conform to the standards of gender, regardless of their body.
And then we're showing you this video too because although he has these critiques, he's also a very big advocate for trans people and like more so specifically trans masculine people to seek out healthcare, especially regarding like genitalia, because like, yes, like the gynecologist isn't the most, gynecologist isn't an inclusive word because like the word gyno, or like one of the, basically it translates to like women. And also health insurance companies, if you change your gender marker, sometimes will be like, oh, you have an M on your driver's license? Well, you obviously don't have a vagina. We don't have to pay for your gynecology visit. And also, he also encourages like trans people to just take care of their bodies. So.
Thanks, Doc. Hi, I'm Buck Angel, and for men like me, gynecological problems are still a reality. Early detection is critical, and having your plumbing checked regularly is a simple thing to do. Be proud and be smart. Make an appointment with your gynecologist today or contact your local LGBTQ center for a referral. Remember, own it, use it, or lose it.
I paused it so I can get back to the thing. Oh. Is that helpful? Yes, that's helpful. Oh. Can I escape this one? What's this one? I don't think I'm okay.
Great. Back to our presentation.
Yeah. Sorry.
Wonderful.
Thanks for holding on here. He was one of the first trans-masculine people in the porn industry. He also was an educator. He goes to colleges and universities, and yeah, mostly colleges and universities. Sometimes his stigma is not only because he's a sex worker, but also because, yes, he is somewhat problematic, and it's, well, not somewhat, he is problematic. And then, as I said earlier, he was the first FTM patient. I didn't say this earlier. He was one of the first FTM patients that his endocrinologist, the doctor that helps him with hormone therapy, has ever had. And as I said earlier, he has been transitioning for 23 plus years. And that's...
Yeah, so here's our contact info. Before ending our presentation, just want to do some general critiques where this presentation has a lot of gaps. It has a lot of gaps about race as well as socioeconomic status as well as ability, disability. Those are gaps, both in terms of when we were doing research and trying to find things, it was hard to find things. Aside from notes of that anybody who's aware of trans issues are well aware that trans women of color, especially black women of color or black trans women of color, face violence more frequently and are considered one of the more vulnerable in terms of that safety than white cisgender trans masculine folks.
And also, there was also limitations in some of our research because this presentation was originally only supposed to be 20 minutes long because we developed it for a class, so. But we went over our time in class too, so.
Are there any questions?
Comments? Concerns?
If not, or if you would like to discuss them individually, please let us know. Emails are there.